Let's start. Here are the threats. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes rook. Queen takes pawn, check. Rook takes knight. Here are the checks. Queen takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is rook takes knight. Queen takes rook. Queen takes rook, check. Next puzzle, here are the threats. Queen takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are rook to e8, check. Queen to e6, check. Queen to e2, check. Queen to d1, check. Queen to e4, check. The best move in puzzle position is rook to e8, check. King to f1. Queen to h3, check. Queen to g2. Rook to e1, check. King takes rook. Queen takes queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are queen takes knight. Queen takes bishop, check. Knight takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen to g6, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Queen to h6, check. Queen to h5, check. Queen to h4, check. The answer is queen to h4, check. Bishop to h6. Queen takes knight. Let's continue. Here are threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. Checks in this position are rook to d5, check. Knight to b5, check. Knight to e4, check. Rook to d1, check. The answer is rook to d1, check. King to e7. Rook to e5, check. King to f6. Rook takes rook. Another one. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are knight takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes knight. Here are checks in puzzle position. Knight to e7, check. Knight to h6, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is knight to h6, check. King to h8. Knight takes pawn, check. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in this position are rook takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes knight. Bishop takes pawn, check. The checks are bishop takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is rook takes knight. Rook takes rook. Bishop takes pawn, check. King to g8. Bishop takes rook. Next puzzle, here are the threats. Rook takes rook. Rook takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes bishop. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen to c2, check. Queen to b1, check. Knight to d3, check. Knight to b3, check. Solution to the puzzle is knight to b3, check. Rook takes knight. Rook takes rook, check. One more. Here are the threats. Rook takes bishop. Queen takes rook. Knight takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The answer is rook takes bishop. Rook takes rook. Queen takes rook, check. Another one. Threats in this position are rook takes rook, check. Checks in puzzle position are rook takes rook, check. Bishop to h3, check. Bishop to e2, check. Solution to the puzzle is bishop to h3, check. King to g1. Rook takes rook, checkmate. Next, puzzle position vulnerabilities are queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Queen takes knight. Queen takes bishop. Knight takes pawn. Here are the checks. Queen to e7, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Rook to e7, check. Solution to the puzzle is rook to e7, check. King to g8. Queen takes bishop. Another puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are bishop takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes rook. Queen takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are queen takes pawn, check. The puzzle is solved using bishop to d5. Rook to g1. Bishop takes pawn, check. Rook takes bishop. Queen takes rook, check. Another puzzle. Here are the threats. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is g5. Pawn takes pawn. King takes pawn. Next puzzle. Here are the threats. Queen takes knight, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen to b5, check. Queen to c5, check. Queen to c8, check. Queen to d5, check. Queen to e6, check. Queen to f7, check. Queen to e4, check. Queen to f4, check. Queen takes knight, check. Queen to d3, check. Queen to f1, check. Queen to c2, check. The answer is Queen to f4, check. King to g6. Queen takes knight, check. Next puzzle position vulnerabilities are knight takes pawn. Checks in this position are rook to h7, check. Solution to the puzzle is knight to f6. Rook to b1, check. King to d2. Rook to d8. Rook to e8, check. Rook takes rook. King takes bishop. Rook to d1, check. King to c2. Rook to c1, check. King takes rook. Rook to c8. Rook takes rook, check. Let's see the next puzzle position vulnerabilities are queen takes rook. Queen takes knight. Queen takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are rook to c1, check. The answer is rook to c1, check. Bishop to f1. Queen takes knight. Rook to h5, check. King to g7. Another puzzle. Here are the threats. Knight takes pawn, check. The checks are knight takes pawn, check. Rook to g8, check. Solution to the puzzle is rook to g8, check. Rook takes rook. Knight takes pawn, checkmate. Next, threats in puzzle position are rook takes rook. Queen takes pawn, check. The checks are rook to e2, check. Queen to f4, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is queen takes pawn, check. King to d3. Rook takes rook. Rook takes rook. Queen takes rook. Queen takes pawn, check. King to g8. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Knight takes pawn, check. Rook takes bishop. The checks are queen takes pawn, check. Queen to g5, check. Queen to h4, check. Knight takes pawn, check. Bishop to g5, check. The puzzle is solved using rook takes bishop. Knight takes rook. Queen takes knight. Next puzzle. Here are the threats. Rook takes bishop. Rook takes pawn. Queen takes queen. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Checks in this position are rook to g2, check. Queen to f4, check. Queen to g3, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to g2, check. Queen to h1, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Rook to g2, check. King to h1. Queen takes pawn, checkmate. One more. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are queen takes queen. Knight takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen to e2, check. Queen to f1, check. Queen to c2, check. The puzzle is solved using queen to e2, check. King to g1. Queen takes knight. Let's see the next puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are rook takes pawn. Rook takes knight. Rook takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are rook to d5, check. Rook to c7, check. Solution to the puzzle is rook to d5, check. King to c6. Rook takes knight. Next puzzle. Here are the threats. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes pawn, check. Here are the checks. Rook to h1, check. Rook takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Rook to h1, check. King to g2. Rook to h2, check. King to f3. g4, check. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes rook. Another one. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn. Bishop takes knight. Queen takes bishop. Checks in puzzle position are rook to f3, check. Queen to e3, check. Queen to f4, check. Queen to g5, check. The puzzle is solved using queen to g5, check. Queen to g4. Queen takes pawn, check. Let's see the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes rook. Queen takes knight, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are. Queen to d5, check. Queen to d4, check. Queen to d3, check. Queen takes knight, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Knight to f2, check. Knight to c3, check. Solution to the puzzle is Queen to d5, check. King to e1. Queen to d2, check. King to f1. Queen to d1, check. King to g2. Queen takes knight, check. Next, threats in puzzle position are. Queen takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn, check. The checks are. Pawn takes pawn, check. The answer is. Pawn takes pawn, check. King takes pawn. Queen to c2, check. King to g1. Rook takes rook, check. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.